Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Napoleon, and today we're back with another Enlisted episode, and we're going to be talking about the French Resistance, or the French Resistance Squad, or the Secret Army Squad, or, well, whatever you want to call them, squad. And because these are going to be the latest reinforcements received, La Resistance Squad, so essentially you can call them the Resistance Squad, so that's that. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the squad, the history, the weapon, and whether or not you could use them in a frontline situation or in other situations. That said, without further ado, let's get started. Of course, this video has been made possible for the friends at Discord. If you haven't liked, subscribed, or joined the Discord, highly suggest that you do, but that said, let's get started with the history. In mid-1942, there were three French resistance movements in the French F1 region, which is roughly centered around Lyon: the Combat de Libération Sud and Front Thierry. These sought to coordinate the French military forces, or should I say the underground French military forces. They eventually chose a quote-unquote neutral leader who surprisingly was an admirer of Charles de Gaulle. What a surprising choice. Said person, General Charles de Lestrade, took office in November 1942 and organized the quote-unquote secret army. He worked closely with the quote-unquote other primary resistance forces. These included, but not limited to the United Movement of the Resistance, or the MUR, in January of 1943. However, this did caught the eye of the Gestapo, and by early 1943, the Gestapo arrested de Lestrade, and in 1943 of June. And in June of 1943, de Lestrade and other leaders were captured, leaving the quote-unquote secret army without a formal leader. In early of 1944, the Secret Army merged with other resistance groups to form the French Forces of the Interior, FFI, which you can actually see on their armbands. Moving on, these were essentially structured to participate in active combat regions, or should I say, combat regions behind enemy lines, including Rhône-Alpes and other places. That said, let's move on to Manuel A6. In the late 19th century, the French military sought to modernize its firearms, particularly adopting the revolutionary Lebel M1886 rifle. The semi-automatic rifle was in a response to Germany's rhymeless cartridges. France initiated a new rifle design. Such design was a long recoil operated manual rifle adopted in 1910. It was set to replace the Lebel and featured a 7mm rhymeless cartridge with the initial muzzle velocity exceeding 1000 meters per second. However, debates over ammo specification delayed its final adoption, and by 1914, World War I basically, the mass production of the Manuel was halted. Only 1,013 rifles were ever produced, tested in the trenches, but the complexity of the design and the specialized 7mm ammo limited further production. Most of the Manuel rifles were lost during World War I, only a few survived, most of them were deactivated. Ultimately, the Lebel 1886 was a much better option for the French army, despite its massive size, which, surprisingly if you look in-game, it's also the Manuel size, so that's that. Moving on, let's move on to the stats. This gun is chambered in 7.2mm, which is, well, what I just said. The hit power is 14.2, which is actually pretty high for this gun at this tier and for a semi-automatic rifle in general. That said, the muzzle velocity is 800, which is kind of sad comparing its original, which is 1000. The rate of fire 380, reload time of 5.4, vertical recoil 75, and horizontal of 20, and it has a whopping 15-round magazine, which is by far the largest magazine sizes I've seen from a semi-automatic rifle, and well, it's not a fully automatic rifle, so that's that. Moving on, let's move on to the verdict, and this is essentially not a frontline unit. If you decide to put in the other weapon slot, a Thompson M1A1 at tier 3, then it could be viably usable at that tier. However, the lack of ammunition is very hard for people to use. The main rifle, the Manuel, is a pretty good rifle for both long and short ranges, most notably featuring a very accurate rifle, despite it being semi-automatic. That said, it isn't a good frontline unit. Its most impressive feature is to go behind enemy lines, or should I say the gray zone. It is very situational, however. Sometimes you get behind enemy rallies, and sometimes you find literally the entire enemy team just staring at you. Because they are a guerrilla squad, they do come with 5 TNT charges, of which you are more likely to die before using them all. That said, in terms of voice lines, which I actually listened to, surprise surprise, because this is once again a French squad, it is probably the worst French I've ever heard in my life, and that is coming from a person who essentially took French for 1 year in high school. I know, impressive, and yes, if you haven't figured out, my French sucks. On another note, I am disappointed that they didn't add the Adrian helmet, which is essentially the French helmet from World War I and, well, the modified version from World War II. If you haven't seen the customization tab, this customization tab is pretty lacking and it gets American helmets, though that's kind of depressing. That said, it is a step in the right direction in my opinion, assuming that the Vanguard entire French army is eventually going to be added in Enlisted, so that's good. That said, that is all it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the Discord, and I'll see you in the next one. And by the way, 1 second before I forget, this does come with the ability to carry assault rifles, or should I say semi-automatic rifles. So yeah, you can carry the T-20 with it, which by the way is one of the most insane rifles in game. But yeah, this squad could be essentially used at tier 5, quite literally with the advent of you only do have 2 spare rounds, of which one is already chambered, and the 2 rounds you do have are in reserve, so that's that. But that said, that's all it for this video.